Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for this special UCAN talk show. We're chatting about nutrition for running today. I'm Varun Sriram, your host as always. Thrilled to be joined by Becca Rick, registered dietitian out in Colorado. Becca, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Varn.
Pleasure as always, and I'm really excited to pick your brain and actually hear about a pretty cool adventure that you went on just a few weeks back. So we're going to get into that here just in a moment. But the topic today is nutrition for running and specifically how to use UCAN for running of all different sorts. Now, I know a lot of you guys are may have just wrapped up a fall marathon and are in your off season. We have others that, depending on where in the country you live, you might still be training for a marathon coming up in December or January. So we sort of want to hit on a variety of topics today, and the way we're going to break this up is we want to discuss utilizing UCAN for those longer efforts, those marathon type efforts, and certainly going to get into the logistics of how to train with it and how to carry it with you on race day. We also want to talk about the application of UCAN for off-season nutrition. For those of you that are in your off-season right now, one of the beauties of UCAN is that it's really a product that's applicable year-round. Just a matter of which product you use and how you implement it into your day or into your training. And then finally, we'll end with a little bit of talking about the benefit of utilizing UCAN for shorter workouts. So while many of you who are familiar with the product may know that one of the benefits of UCAN is to deliver that steady, long-lasting energy by keeping your blood sugar stable. There's also a big application for controlling your blood sugar for shorter runs and shorter exercise. So we'll get into that as well. As always, please fire your questions away. You can ask questions as we go along using the GoToWebinar app, and Beck and I will be happy to address them as we go. We're really on here for you and want to make this a valuable resource to answer whatever questions you have. So, in getting started, Becca, you were recently out at the Grand Canyon running the rim to rim to rim and decided to use the opportunity as a little bit of self experimentation and kind of see if you could get by with UCAN as your primary and perhaps your exclusive fuel source in a way. So, tell us a little bit about what you did, what the thought process was behind it, and how it all worked out.
Okay, sure. So, for those who don't know, the Rim to Rim is an adventure that people will embark on in the Grand Canyon, and you start on one rim and then go into the canyon and come out the other. Then you could also do the rim to rim, which is what I did, and I did this with my dad. We started at the South Rim, go into the canyon, come out the North Rim, go back into the canyon, and come out the South Rim. And that it's kind of uncertain exactly the mileage on it, just because what's posted online is not entirely accurate. My app ended up dying at some point, but we're estimating, because I got at least half of it in, about 56 miles, so over 50 for sure, I feel comfortable saying. And this took us just under 18 hours. And as you know, Varn, but I've been experimenting with UCAN in different settings, right, for the last several months. So I've used it on a lot of 14ers out in Colorado and longer days, most recently before the Canyon, a 50K trail race. So I know that my body responds well to UCAN as a fuel source for this kind of activity, which would be long in duration, kind of moderate in intensity. And so I came prepared with UCAN, and as you can see in this picture, I also had a few other backups, like the nut butters were my main backup fuel source, I guess my only other fuel source. And what was fun for me was to plan the nutrition not only for myself, but for my dad as well. So he had never used UCAN prior to this, and he was fine to be a guinea pig in this adventure with me. So he ended up using the same amount of UCAN than I did, but then he also took the nut butters and a couple of packets of backup gels as well, or chews, not gels. So what I ended up doing for the canyon, I did it all on UCAN, including my pre-start meal. So our wake-up time was at 2 a.m., so that was just, coffee, trying to wake up a little bit, and then I took a tropical orange, regular UCAN, and then one vanilla protein UCAN. and I mixed that together in, maybe 14 ounces ish of water. So that was great for kind of some prehydration and also fueling. I took that at 2:30, then we started right around 3 a.m. And I took my first fuel maybe like 3.5 hours in, and I took, well, what I had done was I took four UCAN bars with me, and they were chocolate bars, so I know that they can melt at high temperatures. And in the Grand Canyon, you start pretty cool as it's a desert, but then as the sun comes out, you can warm up pretty quickly. So my plan was to take the bars first to try to catch them on the front end before they were melting, and then to switch over to the gel that I had made. So I used little hydration flasks that are 10.5 ounces, and I made, what did I think I ended up putting four um, packets of the pomegranate blueberry into one hydration flask that was like 10 ounces. And so I had the four bars and then about four packets worth of UCAN fuel into a flask. So I took my first UCAN snack bar 3.5 hours into it, another 2 hours later, another snack bar, and then about 3 hours later, we got to the top of the north rim. So we started with the south rim, got to the top of the north rim around 11:30. So this is like eight, ish hours in, and I took a third UCAN bar, and then we entered back down into the canyon. And of course, I'm not talking about hydration here too, and that would be an interesting talk for another time. So I had a hydration pack with my sodium needs that were very dialed in addition to this fueling with UCAN. So that was the end of my bars because as I took my third bar, it was pretty melted. So I'm like sitting there, trying to lick all the chocolate off of the wrapper and make sure I didn't miss any of the bar. And then I switched over to the gels. So,
And Becca, to
maybe
clarify,
3 hours.
you're talking about the gels just for people on the audience. You're really talking about serving of UCAN mixed in a concentrated form as a gel, just to clarify.
Exactly, exactly. So I in our hotel room the night before, I mean, it was totally makeshift. So, they'll have those little plastic cups out for water or something next to the sink in a hotel room. I asked them for a plastic fork from downstairs. I put the gels like little by little, or I put the UCAN packets little by little into the plastic cup. I would add a little bit of water, stir it to the right consistency. So this is complete makeshift, but it can work, right? So I knew kind of where I was going with this, and I would just add a little bit as much as possible, and then transfer that into the hydration flask. And then, I had this little tiny plastic cup that I was working with, but it still worked. So then the end result of that was four packets worth of the UCAN Super Starch. I use the pomegranate just by taste preference inside of a 10.5 ounce hydration flask. So it's very concentrated, about 2 to 3 ounces per packet is what the recommendation is generally with UCAN when you're mixing it to make a gel. So and just for the benefit of not having to carry a lot, I had everything, all those gels, just within one hydration flask in my pack. So it was really convenient for me, and I could just grab it out of the front whenever I wanted to take a little bit. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. So I think one of the things
Okay.
that we're getting at here is, with UCAN, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when you're doing these longer efforts, you're really able to minimize the fuel intake, and it's because of the unique properties of how the product works. Becca, you'd say that you were taking, roughly a 20 to 30 gram serving of carbohydrate about every 2 hours. Does that sound approximately correct?
Yeah, or a little bit less than that, like 2 to 3 hours. Yeah. So I kind of sipped on that gel throughout the remainder of the trek, and my total, so I didn't even finish that whole hydration flask. So I left about probably at least a gel of one packet's worth that I didn't consume, and then I left one bar that I didn't take. So my totals in terms of fuel, was approximately 800 to 860-ish calories. for the whole 18 hours. And the approximates are just because I'm not sure exactly with the gels. I don't know exactly how much I left in there. So I was estimating based on look. And that would be calories per hour, putting me between 44 and 48, which sounds so low. And it is kind of low. So my thought on that was I had never hit a point with the UCAN where I bonked, which was awesome. I was curious. The last long event that I had done solely on UCAN was like 7-ish hours. So I knew it would work for long durations, but there's a big difference between 7 hours and 18 hours. And so I think it's important, to take backups just in case you have any issues. But it provided that steady stream of energy for me for the entire duration. The thing is, I think that it's important to note too that my intensity was very moderate. So we were moving the whole time, like continuous effort, but it wasn't incredibly strenuous. I wasn't running the whole time. It's a mixture of hiking on the steep parts, hiking down on the steep parts, and then running where we could. So I would probably have taken, I would have probably gone through more gel, I would imagine, if I was going at a harder intensity. But even still, the calories were significantly low.
So we use that story really to bridge us into our main point, where when we're talking about the keys to success for running, and when I say success, I also am specifically talking about fueling success. There's really three important components we want to look at. Number one is keeping our blood sugar stable. Number two is being able to become a more efficient or better fat burner. And number three, of course, is keeping your stomach happy. So we're going to kind of talk about each of these aspects individually, and how they apply to UCAN and how you can apply it to your own running. So let's start with stable blood sugar. Becca, as a dietitian, why is it important to keep your blood sugar stable? I remember before I was immersed in this whole world, when I heard about blood sugar and controlling your blood sugar, I would often think that's only something that people with diabetes need to worry about. But it's really something that everybody needs to worry about. Why is that the case?
Yeah, for more than just with exercise, it's important to keep blood sugar stable for general health purposes. So, unstable or abnormally high or consistently high blood sugars in the body over a period of time are more associated with chronic disease states than anything else in our diet that we've been able to observe so far in science. So, like diabetes, high triglycerides, even are going to be caused by or associated with uncontrolled blood sugars. And so, those spikes and those dips are what we're trying to avoid for general health and then also in exercise. But the main reason as a dietitian, you're thinking about someone's health as being the number one priority, and then of course performance as a second priority. So not only just that avoiding chronic disease, but then also keeping energy stable throughout the day. So I think most of us have, not everyone, or maybe they just haven't figured it out yet, the correlation when you felt that sugar spike from either a dessert or a soda pop or whatever it is, and then that subsequent drop in blood sugar and energy levels. So keeping our blood sugar stable can help just with a more stable mood throughout the day and more stable energy levels throughout the day. It can help with improved sleep as well. So there's many benefits to keeping your blood sugar stable and for general health, not just during exercise.
When we look at it in the context of runners, things that impact our blood sugar, carbohydrates are going to have the most significant impact on our blood sugar. And we look at kind of the traditional method of fueling for runners, your bagels, your pastas, your breads. These are all faster acting carbohydrates that are going to provide the up and down in your blood sugar levels, that inconsistent energy that we see. So, how many of us have had a bagel or a banana before we go out and run, and then 30 minutes into the run we're reaching for something else? Well, there's a why behind that. It's because our blood sugar is going to rise and drop, and when it drops, like Becca just mentioned a moment ago, you need to keep it steady to feel that evenness in energy. And then when we look at sports nutrition with the sugar-based drinks and gels, these products with fast-acting carbohydrates, these are also going to cause those fluctuations and that inconsistent energy. when you're running. And it's a reason why with traditional nutrition, you have to dose over and over and over again. If Becca was, we started by her talking about her adventure in the Grand Canyon where she was out there for 18 hours. If she was taking a traditional sugar-based gel instead of her concentrated UCAN gels, she certainly would be needing to take them in, more than every 2 to 3 hours, right? There's a reason those gel
Absolutely.
products tell you to take them every 30 to 45 minutes. Becca, I mean, have you even, just to get back to that point for a moment, have you even thought about what you might have had to carry on that adventure of yours? You talked about somewhere around 800 calories consumed for an 18-hour run. Have you even thought about what you might have consumed if you were relying on more of the traditional sports nutrition?
Sure. Traditional sport nutrition recommendation would have me at the 6,480 carbohydrate calories for that 18 hours.
There you
So
go.
that's
So
a lot different.
it's a world of a different. It's a world of.
And not only is it more calories, that's not really the point. The point is, what does it do to your gut? And I don't want to carry all that, right? That's extra weight that I don't want on my pack. So,
So in saying that, we're getting to an understanding where there's something really different and unique about UCAN. And what's different about UCAN is our carbohydrate. So for those of you that are familiar with the product, you may have heard this word super starch associated with UCAN. For those of you that are new to it, this might be the first time you're hearing it, but super starch is really the key ingredient in our UCAN products, and it's the carbohydrate source in UCAN. So we don't use sugar, we don't use maltodextrin, we use starch. And the backstory to UCAN, what really makes it unique is the origins of this carbohydrate. So the superstarch was originally created for our founder's son Jonah, who has a life-threatening disease that causes hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. So similar to an endurance athlete in a way who is relying on sugary gel every 30 to 45 minutes, Jonah's body is unable to break down and process carbohydrates. So he too was being fed every 90 minutes from the time he was born in order to maintain steady energy. Now, this was a really stressful life for the family. His parents were waking up 3 to 4 times in the middle of the night to feed him because if they didn't, again, he would have these hypoglycemic episodes and could have seizures. So Jonah's family, they set up a foundation. They started researching all different types of carbohydrates, and they were essentially looking for something that would control and stabilize blood sugar for a long period of time. The idea was let's find something that we can give to these kids prior to sleeping at night that's just going to give them that slow and even burn of energy and control their blood sugar. That's really where superstarch came about. Our starting ingredient is non GMO cornstarch, and then we put it through a 40-hour cooking process. Completely natural, no chemicals, no enzymes, just heat and water. The way the starch is cooked significantly slows the breakdown of our carbohydrate and causes it to enter your system at a very steady and even rate. So one of the beauties of UCAN, and we take it back to Becca's experience, why she's able to take in a serving of UCAN and it's lasting her, 2 hours plus, is really because of the rate of delivery of that carbohydrate. So before we launched into sports nutrition, we wanted to test our super starch against maltodextrin, which is what you'll find in virtually every popular sports nutrition product. You'll find it at a local running store. And if you look at the graph on the screen again, you see with maltodextrin, you're going to get that significant surge in your blood sugar. And then 30 to 40 minutes later, you're going to get that significant drop. But what's so cool about the superstarch is on that same amount of carbohydrate or calories, you're not getting that big spike. And then the decline is really nice and steady over time. So, this is roughly a 25-gram serving of both carbohydrates. 25 grams is about what you find in a gel. It's about what you find in a packet of UCAN. You see that this 25 grams of UCAN carbs, your blood sugar is still around baseline 2 hours later. So when Becca says she's feeling about 2 hours of that steadiness and energy, that's really what this graph is showing, that UCAN is going to deliver a longer lasting flow of energy off that same serving size because of the rate at which it enters your system. Now, Becca, one of the interesting things I found is that on this this is a question we get a lot from people saying, do I have to be on a certain diet to have this work for me, or is it going to take my body time to adapt? Your dad used it for the first time.
yeah.
So did he take time to adapt? And then what's your general thought when people ask that?
Generally, we recommend, or I recommend, for people to experiment with things before they need it in a race, right? So during training is the ideal time to experiment with any kind of different strategy that you're going to be using, whether it's with hydration and sodium replacement or with fueling. Just because you don't want to put yourself into a situation where it didn't work for you, the race is not the time to figure that out. But let's see, a couple of things. Like, my dad has a pretty high tolerance for different foods, and I know that. And he's not that picky. There's things going into it where I wasn't worried about him having some kind of sensitivity or reacting in a certain way. So he um, took all of the UCAN I did. He took four and consumed four UCAN chocolate bars, and he took his entire gel flask that I made, which was the equivalent of four packets of the pomegranate, and he tolerated it just fine. He did really well on it. So I would like to think that that contributed to his ability to continue going, but it was cool to see that he was able to tolerate it as a first time user on such a long event. I think typically with UCAN, we just ask people to try it multiple times in different situations and give different flavors a try just to see what they end up liking and tolerating the best.
So I think one of the big takeaways from what we see here is that steady blood sugar equates to steady energy, and with UCAN you're able to keep your blood sugar steady without having to fuel as frequently. So it's leaving you less prone to GI distress. You're consuming less calories because you simply don't need those excess calories in an effort to stabilize your blood sugar. I mean, that's really why you're taking a gel every 30 minutes or every 40 minutes. It's not because you need the calories. It's because you need to keep your blood sugar stable, and that's one of the things that UCAN really offers. And one of the interesting things is when people say, do we need to adapt? UCAN's really, it's a food product, so it's a nutrition facts label, and so sometimes I laugh and I say, would you need to adapt to eating a sweet potato, or would you need to adapt to eating oatmeal? It's you kind of think of it in the same vein. I mean, there's a lot of other carbohydrate sources that are low glycemic or slower burning. Now UCAN is going to be even slower burning than any of those other foods because in the development of the superstarch, all existing carbohydrate sources were evaluated. Remember, they were simply trying to figure out what would maintain blood sugar in these kids for the longest time. It had nothing to do with performance or athletics or sports nutrition. So in that sense, really, that's how you should think of it. It's a food that you consume prior to exercise. You can also implement it during and after exercise, which we'll talk about. But yeah, that's kind of the way to think of it in terms of an adaptation. Now,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Byron, I'm glad that you said that because I think that's a good point to make. It's still going to have an immediate benefit. Using the UCAN will still have an immediate benefit. I think the point I was making in terms of performance is just because it is different. I think it's something that people kind of have to get used to. They're not getting that spike and that they're not getting the drop either, but it's different and it works differently than other sports nutrition products. So it might just be a new feeling more than anything, but the benefit is still going to be immediate.
Great point. It's a new feeling, and I think certainly if people are looking at using it for longer stuff, there's experimentation that needs to be done with the timing of it. How frequently do I need to take it? How much of it do I take it? So yeah, that not at all. That was not at all to. I think the smartest thing to do is absolutely to implement it in your training because that's where you're going to figure out the dosing and the timing of it. So I think what Becca said about practicing within your training is right on. But if you're to think about is there an adaptation to it? It's more just experimenting and practicing with it than perhaps adapting to it. So as we talk about stable blood sugar as one of the keys to running success, a huge key to success in running, especially when we're talking about the marathon and beyond, is becoming a better fat burner. Becca, you're a perfect person to speak to that. Working in a performance center where you guys are, really talking a lot about metabolic efficiency and improving your ability to burn fat, and you're doing testing. Why should runners? Let's perhaps split this up into two segments. Why should runners care about being better at burning fat from a performance standpoint?
The simplest way to say that is because you have more fat in the form of you have more fuel in the form of fat in your body than you do in the form of carbohydrate. So our carbohydrate stores are very limited in our bodies. maybe max of 2,000 calories that you can have on board. And that's going to be lower for females, it's going to be lower for smaller bodies, and it would be lower if your glycogen, which is stored glucose, is not maxed out at any given point. So you can run through that pretty quickly if you're a carb burner. If you're going through carbohydrates as your main fuel source during running, that's not going to get you through a marathon without replacing carbohydrate. So if we can teach the body to use more of its fat stores, which are limitless, then we're not going to hit that crash point, or that we're not going to bonk in a race or in a training session.
This perhaps goes without saying, but how about for people that are more focused on fitness and not, not really worried about improving their performance, and these are perhaps, well, maybe everybody wants to improve their performance to some degree, but if on a scale they're more weighted towards improving their fitness, controlling their weight, perhaps losing some weight. I mean, this is probably representative of a high number of recreational runners that are even training for half marathons or marathons. Perhaps a lot of people that you work with have that goal in mind. Um, why would you want to better burn fat in that situation?
Yeah, I think what you said is, goes without saying, is probably pretty obvious, just meaning in terms of body composition changes, right? So if you're able to more burn more fat at times of rest or during exercise, even if that is just for your everyday fitness enthusiast, not trying to cover long distances with running, if you're able to burn more fat, then your body composition is going to change favorably, so that you would be going through your fat stores. Now, if you're reliant on carbohydrate as your main fuel source, then you're going to have to continue feeding, and it's really hard for your body to ever lose fat when you have to keep up your blood sugar levels by taking carbohydrate in. So it's, in order to be able to tap into those fat stores, we have to teach the body to be able to use that as a preferred fuel, as opposed to using carbohydrate as a preferred fuel.
So to that point, how does UCAN apply to this? And John just asked a question, perhaps foreshadowing what we were about to show here. Does UCAN have studies, or aware of studies that talk about how UCAN increases the percentage of fat versus glucose that you're burning during running? So one of the things that we see with UCAN is, because the carbohydrate releases so steadily into the body, it doesn't cause a rise in the hormone insulin. Now, Becca, I'll let you talk a little bit about insulin. How does insulin, or what is the function of insulin, and how does insulin relate to your ability to burn fat?
Mm-hmm. So insulin is a storage hormone, and it's released when your blood sugar levels increase. So when you take in a carbohydrate, then that's going to impact your blood sugar, and it's going to increase your blood sugar. Now, when we're taking in large amounts of carbohydrate alone, then we're going to have larger increases in blood sugar. And we have large increases in our blood sugar, then insulin is released in large amounts. And when that happens, that turns off your body's ability to oxidize fat, or to use fat for fuel, because the focus is to get that, to use that carbohydrate that's now entered into your system.
So that's
So
really
when insulin's released, yeah, fat use is basically shut off for that time.
So one of the beauties that we see with UCAN is we are a fuel source, an energy source, a carbohydrate that's giving you that sustained and steady release of glucose, but we're doing that without limiting your ability to utilize fat for fuel. So you're getting people have compared UCAN to a hybrid car where you're burning two fuels. You're utilizing fat and carbohydrate to a higher extent. Now, to John's specific question, the percentage of fat versus glucose as an energy source. I mean, Becca, that's precisely what you guys test, right? At Energy Performance, you guys hook people up to the metabolic carts and test at different intensities what the percentages are, and that's something. And correct me if I'm wrong, Becca. Isn't that something that's going to vary from person to person based on their overall diet, not just UCAN?
Absolutely. We use it as a test to modify your daily nutrition. We see that it's mostly impacted what you're using during exercise, be it fuel from, it's always going to be a mixture of carb and fat. It's just that we'd like to see more fat than carbohydrate at varying intensities, of exercise and for longer durations. Um, oh, where was I going with that?
Well,
Oh
just
yeah, it's mostly impacted through your daily nutrition. So we're doing this in a fasted state, but one of the studies that we'd love to, do is trying it with UCAN and seeing how if what the impact is on your ability to use fat after ingesting UCAN, like prior to that test.
instead of doing that test
So
in a fasted state.
yeah, exactly. So
So
more probably more on that in the future.
definitely. So, I think when we compare UCAN to other carbohydrates, other faster acting carbohydrates, we see because of UCAN's ability to keep your blood sugar stable, we see a better ability to utilize fat for fuel, as we see in this graph from a clinical trial that we conducted at the University of Oklahoma. This was prior to our products being launched in sports nutrition. We find that with UCAN keeps insulin low and allows that better fat utilization. You know, both in that pre-exercise period, post-exercise period. It would be fascinating to compare that to a
Mhm.
fasted workout. And then there's simply the impact of using less calories. So we've talked about this, when Becca was talking about, again, off the top, about running the rim to rim to rim, where we often find that a serving of UCAN, 100, 110 to 130 calorie serving of UCAN, people are replacing, 300, 400 calories of other sports nutrition with this. And it's twofold, right? We already went back to the fact that when you're controlling your blood sugar, you simply don't need to take in as much. So you don't need to get all those excess calories in just to stabilize blood sugar. And really, the quote from Dr. Kathy Echo says it all. It's really the ability to maintain blood sugar that sustains energy levels. So from a fitness standpoint, UCAN is huge because it does that, meaning it maintains blood sugar without putting lots of calories on board, and really allows you to make every calorie count. Beck, is there anything you could add to this? I mean, it's anybody could say, consume less calories, but if your performance suffers or you don't feel good, you're probably not going to stick with it. From your standpoint, why do you find that people are able to consume less calories and still maintain their energy, maintain their performance when they're using UCAN?
Well, what do you mean? Why? Like, why are they able to?
Yeah, what's kind of the reasoning behind it? I mean, is it only because of the steady blood sugar? Is it because they're tapping into more fat? Is it a combination of the two factors?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think we're still trying to answer the why behind it, but we know that it works, right? So anecdotally, in our own experiments and with clients, we know that the UCAN allows you to take much less calories for longer periods of time, varying types of exercise too, right? So we see this being beneficial for marathoners, but then even ultra marathoners are still able to take much less fuel over the long period of time. And I think one of the main benefits to taking less calories in, aside from like gut issues and just what it does on your system, is avoiding any kind of overfeeding that's happening, right? So a lot of times with these sports nutrition recommendations that are out there for people who are who have weight loss goals or who have body composition goals and are using running or using another kind of exercise as a way to achieve those, if they're following those traditional recommendations, it's easy to overfeed and harder to make those weight loss or um, body composition goals possible.
So that kind of, you kind of got us to our last point in terms of well, actually, I just want to add one more thing. So, recently excited to add Dathan Ritzenhein to the UCAN roster of athletes. Dathan is a three-time U.S. Olympian, first American at Boston this year, and very very strong contender for the Olympic trials, to qualify for the Olympics in Rio at the Olympic trials in February. And really interesting quote from Dathan. He talks a lot about how he's a really high carbohydrate burner. So he's had metabolic testing done where the fat max test is one of the tests where he's had done, and he's found that he burns tends to burn more carbs than fat. So he would really struggle at the end of his marathons because he just couldn't keep up with the fueling that his body required. So he started using UCAN leading up to the Boston Marathon last year, and really found that in those longer and harder efforts, he was feeling much stronger at the end he was able to metabolize fat better, able to spare his limited carbohydrate stores, like Becca talked about. We have a finite amount of carbohydrate we can store. He was kind of really able to spare that and utilize it more towards the end of the workout when he really needed it. So we hear this time and time again where athletes find that using UCAN as a tool in their training really contributes to making them a lot more efficient of an athlete. So let's talk really about some nuts and bolts in terms of how to use UCAN. And I want to really start, by talking about utilizing UCAN in training. There's the application, right, Becca, of practicing with UCAN, and you want to practice with something that you're going to use in your race or in your event. But in terms of the metabolic adaptation, what do you see as the benefit of really using UCAN and making it as a consistent part of your training versus kind of just saving it for an event? Why would somebody benefit more from what UCAN has to offer in terms of energy delivery if they're really making it a core part and a consistent part of their training?
Just being able to take, for the same reasons that you would use it, I guess, during a race, right? So being able to take less calories with you during training, same benefits as you would see for any kind of longer duration activity, like in a race. So taking less calories, being able to tap more into your fat stores for fuel, not having those bonkings, not having the sugar crashes, having a more prolonged fuel source, and also not having a lot of the GI issues that come in with fueling with some different simple sugar-based products.
So for a typical training session, one of the best way to think about UCAN, if you're going to use it to fuel a workout, is it's really a pre-exercise snack, and it's something that we've referenced it as a food. It's really, whether it's if you're using our drinks or our bars, it's something that you're having 20 to 30 minutes prior to a workout. Even the UCAN drink mixes, you're going to not sip on them slowly as you exercise. You're really going to consume it prior to your workout. We've talked about how it's really easy on the stomach. So, for folks that are nervous or struggle to eat so close to a workout, I think one of the things you'll really find with UCAN compared to other fuel sources or even, carbohydrate foods, like I was always a banana guy or a piece of toast guy, and it was always inconsistent how it would sit in my stomach. Some days it worked great. Some days it would sit a little bit heavy. That's one of the nice things about UCAN is you can have it pretty close to a workout and it's going to leave your stomach very, very quickly. We generally find that a packet of UCAN or a scoop and a half, if you're using the tubs, a scoop and a half equals one packet, is going to last you for about 90 minutes to 2 hours. So we have a gentleman here, John, asking for a 3 hour run. How would I use UCAN? We'd really say that you take one serving prior to your run, your 3 hour run, and then 90 minutes in, you take a second serving of UCAN. Now, the beauty of UCAN is really that with a sugar-based product, you need to consume a certain amount of fluid to aid with digestion. One of the characteristics of our carbohydrate is that it's a very, very large molecule. It's an extremely long chain of glucose molecules, and it's going to leave your stomach very, very quickly because of that. Larger molecules pass through the stomach quicker. Your smaller sugar molecules, they're going to sit in your stomach and cause some of that GI distress. So I say that to say that the amount of fluid you mix with UCAN has no bearing on how the product works. Becca talked about making her UCAN gels for the rim to rim to rim, and we precisely see a lot of people doing that, especially if they don't want to carry a lot of like a full water bottle during a run. So if you see on the screen here, how do you make a UCAN gel? It's really you take one packet, one serving, mix it with just a small amount of water, 2 to 3 ounces of cold water, and then you can even either carry it in a little Ziploc baggie, a little sandwich bag, or a soft flask, a little gel flask, and 90 minutes into your run, you're dosing again. So if we were to extrapolate this over, a marathon, 4 hours or 5 hour marathons, it's really one serving of UCAN before, and then an additional serving of UCAN every 90 minutes, mixed as thick or as thin as you'd like. Now, some folks,
And
Becca, like you, for example, you actually did a different approach to start out the rim to rim to rim, right? You doubled up and had two servings of UCAN prior to the start. Can you talk about that
yeah,
and why you did that?
exactly. Yeah, well, I was just going to add that to John's question of his 3 hour run, one other option is to double up beforehand so that way you can pretty much go out the door with only water. You don't have to carry any fuel to have during. So you could just double up. And what I did was a packet of the protein and a packet of the regular. And the reason that I like that is just to get, most people can tolerate small amounts of protein before exercise. And I like having that a little bit of protein in my system because that's being used as well. So over the course of a long period of time, if I can get any protein in, that's better than not. That's why I like to mix it. So if you can tolerate the protein, and you should be able to, at least one packet mixed with the one packet of regular, the tropical orange and the vanilla go really well together, then I would go for that, or just take 2 packets or 3 scoops of any of the flavored, just regular UCAN with the super starch only, no protein, and that should get you through the 3 hour run.
And as far as we can tell, whether you utilize the approach that Becca's talking about, where you're doubling up and taking 2 servings before the 3 hour run, or you take 1 serving and then take another serving 90 minutes in, we haven't really heard too much of a difference in terms of the energy it provides. I think it's more of a preference and a convenience factor. If you're somebody that just doesn't want to carry anything with you, then taking everything up front and then just being able to run with water is really a fantastic option. There's other folks that, whether it's the mental comfort of taking some type of fuel in the middle of their run, or they simply don't want to intake so much prior to their run, then taking 1 serving before and another 90 minutes in works equally well. I think one of the things to keep in mind is if you are taking 2 servings prior, it doesn't mean that you need to double up on the fluid, right? We've already spoken numerous times about the ability to mix UCAN thicker. So, if you could mix those 2 servings of UCAN with 12 ounces of water still, just like you may mix the 1 serving, and you'd be fine. It's going to impact the taste and the consistency, but it's not going to impact how the product works. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you feel like you want to double up with the servings of UCAN prior to your run, so you can just get several hours of that steady energy out of it, don't necessarily think that you have to double up on the water. Now, just in terms of the different products we have and that we've referenced, the products with the super starch in it, what we're really talking about are going to be what you see as UCAN Fuel, UCAN with protein, and UCAN Snack on your screen. So the UCAN Fuel and the UCAN with protein both contain the same amount of the super starch. So that's the carbohydrate. So they're both going to give you that same stable blood sugar, steady energy effect. They both have some electrolytes in them, about 200 milligrams of sodium, 140 milligrams of potassium, roughly in that range per serving. And then the only difference with the UCAN with protein is the added protein on top. So both products can be used both products can be used during, and then the UCAN with protein can also be used for recovery. Now, the UCAN snack bars also have the super starch in them, plus protein, fiber, and fat to help curb some hunger. So these, again, work great pre. Becca talked about using them during, and did reference that the bars right now, because of the chocolate coating and the coconut oil that's in them, do tend to melt in heat. But we're about 3 weeks away from coming out with an uncoated cinnamon bar that actually has cocoa butter instead of coconut oil. So that's going to hold up much, much better in the heat. For anyone that's cooked with coconut oil, you know that it's very susceptible to melt when the temperature changes. So I think that'll be a
And
much more viable option for having in the heat.
and Lauren, for the chocolate and the chocolate peanut butter, those are still fine options. We do have a lot of athletes just cutting the coating off, so that works too if you just prefer those flavors.
There you go, perfect. So you guys have figured it out. You guys have figured it out kind of on your own before we have a product for you that doesn't melt. So that's great to hear. But then there's another, and I should talk about the UCAN hydrate as well. The UCAN hydrate, it's just an electrolyte replacement, no sugar, no calories, formulated to match the ratio with 5 electrolytes to match the ratio of electrolytes, the mix of electrolytes that you lose when you sweat. So it's really, there's a lot of electrolyte products that just focus on the sodium and potassium, but this is really a complete electrolyte profile with chloride, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium in the ratios that you need to match what you lose when you sweat. And as we talk about the different products, Becca, let's shift gears a tiny bit to nutrition for the off season. The dietitian in you probably will tell people to stay away from sports nutrition products when the training volume isn't very high. But UCAN kind of changes the way we think about things, right? Because it's not traditional sports nutrition in the sense of sugar-based fuels. So, is there a room to implement UCAN in the off season? And if so, what do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. So, generally speaking, I like to think of the off season as a great time to experiment with new foods, try new recipes, focusing on consuming a whole foods based diet and getting away from some of those convenience foods and sports nutrition products that become a large part during your peak season. The off season is also a great time to focus on weight or body composition goals. So with that in mind, I think that's where you can come in a great way. So of course it's very individual like everything, but a couple of potential uses for UCAN in the off season would first off I think be with weight loss goals. So we know that with the UCAN, as we've been talking about, this is a fuel that provides that prolonged energy and it doesn't spike our blood sugar. So we can consider using UCAN for a snack, like having the snack bars. This is a great time to use that as an afternoon snack or a morning snack. I was telling Baran before we got on the webinar that I just most recently tried the UCAN, the new flavor cinnamon, in plain Greek yogurt, and I mixed that together, and that was a phenomenal snack. So using it in a way like that, where you're pairing it with other foods, you could use it as a component of a smoothie. So my colleague Dina Griffin has an e-smoothie book that is like I think there's 85 smoothie recipes in there, and some of them use UCAN. So you can always mix it in with something like that, where you're combining UCAN into a smoothie for basically a meal replacement or maybe at breakfast time that you would have that. So that's one way to use UCAN in the off season, more for achieving those weight loss goals, is a great fuel source to add to your diet. And the second way would be for convenience. So ideally, in my perfect world, we'd all be eating whole foods all the time, but I think realistically, we need to have some backup options on hand with us for those times that you need a snack or you're in between meals longer than expected, or you're just out and about and you're hungry. I think this is a great time to have some UCAN on board as a good snack option when you might not have a better option and be predisposed to grab something um, like from the vending machine or elsewhere. So that's where you can have, like, what I like to do is just having a couple of UCAN snack bars on hand with me all the time in case I get into a situation where I need something to eat. This is a great option that's going to stay well within your nutrition goals. So I think of it two ways: the weight loss goals, using it as a pairing with different meals or snacks, and then as that convenience item that we should just always have on hand just in case.
And I think with what you're saying, Becca, it's like so many times when people have that that 10:30 a.m. Kind of lull at their desk at work, where you before lunch you feel like reaching for something, or 3 p.m. That mid afternoon slump. A lot of times your stomach might not be growling, but you feel like you need to put something in your system because your blood sugar might be low, and so a lot of
Yeah.
times that's where we gravitate towards the vending machine, like you said, or those sugary drinks. And so one of the ways that, just to piggyback on what you're saying, where we see personal trainers who are recommending UCAN for their weight loss clients, is really finding those trouble times in the off season where you might feel like reaching for something convenient, or you might be more prone to a sugar craving, and really implementing UCAN, either the UCAN with protein or the UCAN snack, or mixing the UCAN with something else as a fuel source to keep your blood sugar steady. That's really going to help keep a lot of those cravings away. And you alluded to smoothies. This is a very simple smoothie that can be made with either the chocolate or the vanilla cream UCAN with protein. Works really great as a breakfast smoothie. And there's a host of other recipes, but this is one that I turn to almost on a daily basis for breakfast. Is 1 to 2 scoops of the vanilla cream UCAN with protein, 12 ounces of unsweetened almond milk, a tablespoon of natural peanut butter, portion of a banana, and blend it with ice. All told, this might end up being about 300 to 350 calorie breakfast, and I'll find that it keeps that hunger away, and my energy is really, really steady for a good 4 hours when I have the shake. 8:30 in the morning. Maybe only around noon or 12:30 is when I'm really um, reaching for or really thinking about lunch. So all good suggestions that Becca laid out in terms of how to utilize UCAN for the off season. Now we have a few questions as we're talking about this. Jocelyn asks. She says she has the UCAN fuel or just the super starch without the protein. What fruits can I add to make a smoothie? It says in the jar, do not mix with food high in sugar. So Becca, what fruits, if people are looking to combine things with UCAN and looking to keep the sugar content lower, what fruits do you recommend?
I would say berries. That would be an easy go-to. They're lower in sugar than some other fruits, and they're high in great nutrient profile, being a lot of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants in there. So a variety of berries is a great way to start. Then I would encourage you to look at other nutrients as well. So if you're using this as a snack, we want to think about including protein and fat in there too. So like your example of the shake that you have posted, Brian, is a perfect kind of a distribution of a variety of nutrients that's going to help you to stay fuller for a longer period of time.
And Lindsay asked a good question, which other people may be wondering as well about how many carbs in the shake. So very, very on an estimate, the 1 to 2 scoops of UCAN, a scoop of the vanilla cream UCAN is going to be about 12 grams of carbs. So if we say 2 scoops at a high end, we're talking about 24 grams of carbs. Third of a banana might have, 7 or 8 grams of carb, minimal carb and everything else. So we might be looking at around 35 grams of carbohydrate roughly if you're using the 2 scoops of vanilla cream UCAN. But one of the things that's kind of important to understand is that UCAN carbs aren't exactly the same as your traditional carbohydrate. And Becca, maybe you can shed. I think this all comes back to what we've been talking about the whole time. But why might somebody look at carbohydrates that are coming from UCAN a little bit differently than carbohydrates coming from, a more traditional source?
Sure. The reason that these count differently is because they don't spike your blood sugar. So that's kind of where it all comes together, right? So if you're taking in just 40 grams of simple sugar, then that's going to have a large impact on your blood sugar, and then you're going to release that insulin, and it goes back to all that we talked about with not being able to tap into your fat stores, and then also having that blood sugar crash, where then your body's going to be craving more sugar in order to get that energy level back up and the blood sugar level back up. So then you're in that whole roller coaster that we want to avoid. With the UCAN, just doesn't do that. We've seen that in studies, and we've seen that in practice as well. So that's where it can be looked at differently. And two, with your shake, just going back to the nutrient distribution and answering that carb question, the important thing to look at is how you've mixed it too. So you also have a good amount of protein in there, and that really helps balance the blood sugar as well. So when you mix nutrients like carbs and fats and proteins, then your body doesn't have that large response to a carbohydrate as it would to a carbohydrate alone. So mixing nutrients is another way to also stabilize your blood sugar.
Is there a rule of thumb that, especially as we're talking about the off season, where there's a certain ratio that you recommend athletes should, or people in the off season should try to follow when it comes to that carb to protein to fat ratio?
Yeah, we typically think about a ratio of carb to protein in an off season or on a rest day. It's going to be to just like everything that we talk about individual, but a 1-to-1 ratio of carb to protein is a good rule of thumb for generally, and then we would increase that as the demands of training increase and change to like a 2-to-1 ratio or a 3-to-1 ratio of carb to protein. So you'd increase the carbohydrate as your needs of training change. Also, it's important to note too that if someone is consuming a high amount of carbohydrates now and then tries to all of a sudden completely change that, then you might be better off kind of tapering off a little bit from your carbohydrate intake. So if you had that, okay, I'm going to start using this like 1-to-1 ratio to position your meals, it takes a little bit of time to adapt to that if you're used to a high carbohydrate diet. So that might be a good time to just experiment with getting closer to that 1-to-1. But that might not be an overnight change for someone who is pretty heavily dependent on carbohydrate.
John asks an interesting question, and John, perhaps you will try to answer this, and perhaps you can elaborate further if we're not exactly honing in on the point that you're asking. He's saying, based on the discussion, why would I not just use the protein version of UCAN? So, from my standpoint, John, my answer to that is that we generally find that a lot of times people just end up gravitating to whatever flavor they're most comfortable with, especially when we're talking about in training. But I would say that, absolutely, there's no harm in using the UCAN with protein, kind of in every situation, whether it's, as if you're using UCAN for your snacks, then you certainly, I would say, want to either use the UCAN with protein or pair UCAN with some form of protein just for satiety. Remember, a lot of times when people talk about pairing protein with carbohydrate, they're talking about it more to balance out the carb to protein ratio in an effort to keep your blood sugar steady. But remember, because UCAN is a different type of carb, we keep your blood sugar steady on our own. The carb, the super starch keeps your blood sugar steady whether or not it's mixed with protein. So the added protein would be a convenience item for satiety, for recovery, but yeah, I mean, if you find that protein is lacking in your diet, or that you're just always looking for ways to get some extra protein in, really using UCAN with protein in all situations is perfectly fine. And from an energy standpoint, you're not going to be missing out using the UCAN with protein because it still has the same amount of the super starch in it. I don't know, Becca, is there any situation, other than like GI or intolerance to whey or something like that, where you would say that people shouldn't use the UCAN with protein?
Over the course of time, if you're doing something of a long duration, then you might just want to mix it up because that could be a protein. If you were using it for duration type of training or activity, it might just be unnecessary. Small amounts of protein throughout would be ideal if you can. So almost just mixing it, like I talked about, mixing that with a tropical orange and sipping on that, where you're getting more super starch, but you're still getting some protein in there would be fine, or having the protein beforehand but then switching to just the super starch because that's what your body is going to be most needing during exercise. So if you can tolerate small amount, moderate amounts of protein, go for it, but there may be a point at which it's unnecessary.
So with that, I think I just have one last point that I want to hit on to wrap up our discussion today. And we've talked a lot. We started out with ultra Becca telling a story about her experience running an 18-hour event with ultra marathons. We've talked through marathons, but then we also spoke about the application for weight loss. So hopefully there's some understanding that this is not just relevant for extremely long duration exercise. You want to control your blood sugar really all the time. And we talk about UCAN as a tool to control your blood sugar. So, there's other tools to control your blood sugar, but there's not a lot of quick and convenient items that, that are designed to control your blood sugar. Just when you look at a lot of other products out there. So UCAN is a great option in that sense. What about for shorter workouts, shorter races, Becca? Where would you see the benefit? How should people think about UCAN in those situations? Why might somebody benefit from using it?
Kind of just depend on the timing of your meals or snacks or fueling leading up into that shorter workout. But there's absolutely a benefit to having something in your system just so you don't have that drop in blood sugar as you begin to exercise. So, say that you had lunch and now it's like 4 or 5 p.m. and you're about to go to the gym. This would be a great time to have UCAN, not so much for the reason of, oh, I have this prolonged steady stream of energy for 90 minutes, but more for just having something in your system that's going to keep your blood sugar levels steady as you begin to exercise. Does
Excellent.
that answer your question?
Yeah, that's the exact point right there. And I think when you're doing something shorter and that's more intense, you don't want something that's gonna have your stomach in knots. And so for a lot of people,
Right.
treating UCAN as that meal that's designed to keep your blood sugar steady. It's more that, where this is like a pre-workout meal that I can get in me. I don't necessarily need the prolonged energy, but I want my stomach to be happy. I want my blood sugar not to be fluctuating. So absolutely. And then John asked a good question. If I switch to UCAN, do I stop using gels and chews and other sugar-based fuels? That's really the idea here. So certainly towards the end of a really hard effort, if there can be an application for something that's more fast acting, that's quick and convenient. Just logistically speaking, it might be easier for you to carry, but the idea with UCAN here is you're eliminating those sugar-based fuels as being kind of a staple of your training, and that's why, again, it's so the benefit to UCAN is really training with the product, because it's going to make you more efficient. It's going to make you less reliant on those faster acting carbohydrate sources. And then on race day, if you want to use UCAN to start out with, and then towards the end of the race, for whatever reason, you don't want to carry it during your marathon, you want to use UCAN at the start, let it run its course, and then switch over to something faster acting towards the end of the race. That's totally fine. But the idea here is that you're not consuming UCAN and taking gels every 30 minutes. This is replacing the need to take in gels and sugar-based fuels so frequently. Becca, have you had clients that have had success, mixing UCAN and some other products? And if so, how do you tell them to think about it? Like, if somebody likes to take UCAN at the start, but then doesn't really want to carry it with them, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, you hit it spot on with the general recommendation of you can replacing other simple sugar-based products, but there is some application, and that's going to be very individual for later in a race or when you're going at a really hard effort and you need something fast acting. That would be an okay time to consume something else, and that's just going to be on the individual's need and tolerance for that extra boost in energy. Sometimes we'll have athletes that will mix UCAN with other. A lot of people are using UCAN in order to be able to tap more into their fat stores and carry less on board. So, with that in mind, these are also oftentimes the same people who are going more toward whole foods during training and during racing. So these kind of individuals may take like a UCAN, and then the next time they feed, it might be um, like a nut butter packet, kind of like what I had in that picture for the rim to rim to rim, or it might be like half of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something like that. And then they would maybe switch from UCAN to that and back to UCAN, just depending on what strategy ends up working better for them and what their desire is too. Like sometimes people are just ready to chew something. So there's different foods that you can play around with that, and that's where you can be paired with something. But to your point, I wouldn't mix UCAN with a gel at the same time. That would be counteracting the purpose. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I started talking and I had myself on mute, as I told you before, battling a cough, and so didn't want all the folks in attendance to hear my coughing fit. But no, it makes perfect sense. And with that, I think we'll wrap this up. Looks like we're out of questions now, but really appreciate everybody who participated. And I just wanted to let everybody in attendance know that you will be getting a full recording of this via email. So if you joined us late or want to re-listen to certain points, this will be made available to you by email in the next couple hours. We are also extending a special offer to you guys that goes through the weekend. So you can save 15% at our online store. Actually, sorry, I have the wrong URL there. I'm going to type that again. It's generationucan.com/store with the code UCANLEARN, all one word, UCANLEARN. Save 15% on our online store with that code, and that expires Sunday at midnight Eastern time. So have an opportunity to do that and test out the product, or if we've given you some new ideas, perhaps get some of the different products that you may not have tried. So with that, any questions, you all will have my email once you get the follow up. So feel free to reach out, shoot me any questions, anything we didn't answer. But really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And Becca, appreciate you sharing some of your insight as always as well.
Yeah, thanks again, Varn. It's always a pleasure.
And for those of you guys, just a couple of people said, can you repeat the code again? It's you can learn, you can, UCAN, LEARN. Hopefully the idea there is we taught you something today. I don't know if that's true, but that's where it comes from. You can learn. This will also be emailed to you as well. So for Lindsay and a few others in the chat who are asking what the code is, you can learn for 15% off. For Becca Rick, I'm Varun Sriram. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate the interest, appreciate your time, and we will talk to you down the road.